Hello, I'm Maddie Hale and this is Mad World. Welcome to 2024, the year that the world goes insane. 2 billion people go to vote. The US puts itself on the brink of another civil war and we all watch it through our phones. That is, until TikTok gets banned for good. This week, Bud Light sales continue to tank after a progressive marketing campaign. A former White House doctor alleges that Biden's recent medical exam was fixed. And we look at 2024's most pointless election. I'll be joined throughout the show to make sense of all of this by former government advisor James Price and The Telegraph's Madeline Grant. Thanks for joining me. Bud Light is in the news again after its parent company, Anheuser-Busch InBev, reported a 15.3% drop in sales. It's the latest in the commercial woes for the once dominant beer maker, following a controversial marketing campaign with transgender social media star Dylan Mulvaney. This means since May last year, not only did Bud Light lose its 20-year reign as America's #1 beer, the company also lost $1.4 billion in sales. To cast your eyes back, here was the ad from last year.
This month, I celebrated my day 365 of womanhood, and Bud Light sent me possibly the best gift ever, a can with my face on it. Check out my Instagram story to see how you can enjoy March Madness with Bud Light and maybe win some money too. Love ya! Cheers!
The campaign was a break from Bud Light's all-American, man-of-the-people image and was not responded to well, which is clear now through the plummet in US sales. At the time of the decision to use Dylan Mulvaney, country singer Kid Rock posted this boycott video, which was viewed over 50 million times.
Grandpa's feeling a little frisky today. Let me say something to all you and be as clear and concise as possible. Bud Light and Anheuser-Busch. Have a terrific day.
While Kid Rock says he's now made amends with Bud Light, he told Joe Rogan that he still refused to be a promoter of the brand.
I was like, guys, I don't feel right taking your money. I was like, I go, we can continue the conversation, see where it ends up, but honestly, I don't want any corporate deals. I don't feel right. There's not a penny on earth that could make me change who I am or have people look at me in a different way.
Right.
Even though it's probably half the country at this point that likes me and the other half wants to put a bullet in me.
Now guys, this has stayed consistent in the news for the past year, ever since Dylan Mulvaney was made a promoter. What did you think of this? Is this the ultimate example of go woke, go broke? I'll start with you, Maddie.
Yeah, exactly right. And it's, I think, partly because it's such a very flagrant example of it. It's hard to think of a brand that is less akin to, say, Dylan Mulvaney dressed as Holly Golightly from Breakfast at Tiffany's. You have to think, what were they smoking that day? What have they been drinking that day, perhaps? That they made this choice, because it couldn't be further away from the clientele who, normal American blokes who are probably not super woke and are not tuned into these things, and are probably quite sceptical when, more and more kids at their children's schools start identifying as different pronouns or whatever. So what possessed them to do this? So I think the reason it's blown up so spectacularly is because it was just such a departure from what you would expect Bud Light to be doing.
Such a stark contrast. And I think it's one of those situations where it's like, don't fix what's not broken. Not everything needs to, you don't need to jump into a new clientele.
And also exactly, dance with the one that brung you. The all-American man is the secret of your company's success for I don't know how long, probably 100 years or more. It's an old classic American brand. This is often what happens when people are looking for a new consumer base. They end up alienating the people they already have, thinking that they can gain the new people without losing some of the old.
Yes.
It's kind of disloyal to the people that have been loyal to you.
What do you think about it, James?
I don't see the problem. That's clearly an all-American man selling it, isn't it? Oh, no, that's going to get me cancelled for saying that. No, Maddie's exactly right. I think that the problem here is you're going to have some jumped-up little social media intern or some marketing executive who's gone off to some prestigious-sounding American university, has had their head full with this complete brain rot, frankly, turned up and said, right, guys, I've got a great idea. All the kids are going to love it. It's on TikTok. There's this person who is now a woman, although, has about as deep a voice as I do, and we'll come along and say, oh, yeah, we'll drink your beer and we'll double the sales and all the rest of it. And don't worry about all those redneck hicks. They won't know any better, ha, ha, ha. And look what's happened. Billions of dollars of value lost.
The backlash was enormous. I don't know if you remember at the time, because obviously the target market is the everyday American, which is a huge, big middle-class American audience that go to these big country music festivals, and a lot of country singers with their huge followings are getting on stage, not just Kid Rock, getting on stage, and audience members are throwing a Bud Light, and they're, as a performative, part of their show, are throwing it back, saying, I refuse to drink it. So it became this big cultural phenomenon where people were actively boycotting a brand for turning their head away from the popular target market.
Yeah, exactly. I remember reading a story about it where they were struggling to find any shops that would actually stock the product because they were so... Well, it was partly because the sales had been so poor because of the boycott, and probably there were some sellers of it who probably agreed with the consumers who were angry about the ad campaign. So in the end, I think Bud Light had to start paying people to sell their products, which is
the opposite of what you should be doing.
But it just shows that some people describe woke as being a mind virus, and I think that's exactly right, and it acts in this kind of way because no company would ever rationally do something like this. It knew that it would crater its sales and its brand image to such a debilitating extent. I think people have now shifted from Bud Light to other beers, maybe some beers that actually taste of something, to be slightly mean about the product itself. But you see this in other places as well.
Yeah.
Here in the UK, there's a Tate and Lyle sugar brand that make this kind of golden syrup stuff, and for a long, long time it's had a little Bible quote on it, right? Strength brings forth sweetness, and they've got rid of that. This beautiful old school Victorian style design. They've got rid of that because someone in the marketing team is worried that it might be offensive to non-Christians, right? And so we're seeing that we just can't have nice things anymore as a result of this.
Well, it's kind of bizarre because, as I said before, they didn't need to do this. And I'm all for inclusivity, especially if you're a new brand trying to grab as many markets as you possibly can. But this is a well-established brand with it was the number one beer in the US. It's like you didn't need to go out of your way to try and kind of disrupt the market and see what would happen that you've already got.
Yeah. Although I have to say, I was still surprised by the sheer numbers involved here. After they pivoted pretty damn quickly, actually, as it happened, when they saw what it was doing to their sales. They were ultimately... There's the usual kind of sort of face-off between the marketing department and the numbers people who are actually crunching the numbers and saying, don't do this is an incredibly stupid idea. And I think the numbers people must have won because very quickly they ceased that deal. They reverted to kind of all-American man advertising. Almost felt a bit like they were overcorrecting.
I think they were watching Disney, watching what happened there. We can't go down this rabbit hole.
Exactly, but it's to the point where the new adverts were almost like so all-American man that it was a bit ridiculous. They couldn't get it quite right either way. It felt patronising both times. But, they did do that pivot, and this has been some months now, and it continues to crater. The depth of feeling is quite remarkable.
I mean, Kid Rock's obviously moved on. He said that he's happy to make amends. But I do wonder if you guys think that you can kind of come back from such a fall from grace like this.
Well, I think it's exactly as Maddie says, that it shows that the people in this company don't care about their core customer, right? And to the point where they actually denigrate them. If you've got someone like Jeff Bezos, you ask him any question ever, he just goes obsessively about the customer all the time. And that's the secret of this kind of thing. It shows that they think that their core base, they treat them with disdain. Again, frankly, I mean, maybe so, because it's such a tasteless product.
Well, they did feel ostracised and neglected. And I think this is the whole thing with where we are in the world, is that if you are conservative, you're right, when you have Christian values, whatever it may be, they feel, well, I'm not going to speak for everyone, but a majority feel like they're not allowed to be the way they are. And I think when you have such an all-American beer company coming out and, changing the course of the target market, then it's just another example of, I'm not allowed to be myself. And, that's the last thing an American wants to feel when it's a country of freedom. But we're going to move on now. We're going to go to the President of the United States. Joe Biden has passed his physical exam this week, according to White House Dr. Kevin O'Connor. Dr. O'Connor concluded after taking the exam that the 81-year-old Commander-in-Chief is fit to run the country. An exam which is not bound by law but has become normal in modern history for the president to sit a physical exam annually, which is then released to the public. But did he really pass? Physically, Joe Biden is fit for his age. He doesn't smoke, he doesn't drink, he's got at a good weight, and he regularly exercises. The exam looks at everything from optometry to his reflux issues, to his teeth, orthopedics, and his sleep patterns and more. But what about his mental health? The exam results claim that President Biden's neurology is examined, but Americans are questioning how accurate this conclusion of the president is fit to run the country is if his cognitive health is not even looked at.
Come on. A 10-year-old can see this man on the TV and say something's wrong with that man.
This is what one of the things that is gonna annoy me. I know this is gonna happen. Is someone's gonna be like, he has a clean bill of health. His doctor wrote that thing. I'm like, look at what I'm looking at, and now a guy is waving a piece of paper. Now look at it again. Did it change because he waved a piece of paper around, or are you still looking at that same thing?
Well, yes, this exam is released to the public. The White House physician is still bound by confidentiality to a degree. There have been circumstances in the past where physicians haven't disclosed certain health problems to the public. For instance, JFK's Addison's disease was kept secret, Eisenhower's heart attack, and Grover Cleveland's jaw cancer. So does this exam paint the full picture? Former White House doctor Ronnie Jackson, who served under Bush, Obama, and Trump, thinks it's a cover-up.
Cognitive test is part of this physical exam. They did a neurological exam. There's 5 parts to a neuro exam. One of them that they conveniently left out, the one that we care about, is the mental status exam. We have nothing on his mental status. This was a complete joke by Dr. O'Connor. And, you know, if he were serious about this, he would have done a thorough, comprehensive, objective exam that included a cognitive exam. And he would have stood up before the press in the press briefing room and he would have defended it and he would have answered questions. But he doesn't because he doesn't want to answer the questions because he's going to have to lie.
Biden's White House press secretary thinks the president passes a cognitive exam every day.
I think folks need to understand that the president passes, again, a cognitive test every day. If you look at what a clinical cognitive test is actually, what it actually does, it is a 15-minute appointment that is administered by someone that most of the time people don't actually know. And the president has a team of doctors that is with him 24/7. And he is able to do the work every day that is rigorous, that is more rigorous than it would be for any 15-minute clinical appointment.
What did you guys think about this? Because James is shaking his head. Do you think that Dr. O'Connor is hiding something?
I mean, I just think it's absolutely astonishing. I mean, I'm not sure that the press secretary herself would pass cognitive tests on some occasions, given some of the dissembling that she seems to come out with.
Her job is rather difficult, I think. I mean, no one could spin what's currently happening to Joe Biden.
Right.
And yet they are.
Exactly.
Well, they're not really.
Well, not really, according to the polls.
But this is quite worrying, right? So it's all very funny when he makes a gaffe and all the rest of it. But when you go behind the scenes and think that some of the pressures of the job, especially this year coming up, 2020 was a bit different because of COVID. He could hide away in his basement in Delaware and campaign via Zoom. Fine. Can't do that anymore. He's had 4 years of the most stressful job in the world. We can all see what's happening, having to fly around the country and go on campaigns with the nuclear football, as it's called, this briefcase with launch codes and all the rest of it. You know, the most stressful decision that any human could ever possibly make. You know, do you initiate or reply to a nuclear Armageddon or not? When you've got a guy who can't get his words out properly, who's clearly fading. It's a sad thing to see in some ways.
Yeah. It is sad, but it's also insulting. It's insulting to the American public, I think, because it's, you know, obviously that grab that we showed earlier of Timcast, the podcast, you just look, I mean, he's obviously a stand-up guy. No one can deny that Joe Biden is probably a face value, lovely guy. Is he fit to be president right now? When you look at him on the world stage, I think most people just think no. I think that's a general consensus. So I think when you have this annual physical exam and it comes out, nothing here, nothing to see here, he's all good, I think that most Americans would find that kind of insulting and do want him to sit a cognitive exam.
Yeah, I think I'd go so far as to use the word gaslighting here because I genuinely think that it's really insulting to basically say to the American public, almost 400 million thinking, sentient people, that they should trust the 38-page report that we've got here, we've put it all together, or based on what you see every day, your eyes, like what we see Joe Biden doing every day, but actually, no, this report that we're waving in your face, that's what you need to listen to. It's really, it's terribly insulting.
I wonder how Ronnie Jackson, the former White House doctor, he was the doctor for Bush, Obama, and Trump. When he was in there for Trump, he was the one that had to administer the cognitive exam for Donald Trump in 2018 because he was copying so much criticism as whether Donald Trump is crazy, because we all know his approach to the presidency was far from, the norm that we'd seen before. He did the exam. He then faced the media for what seemed like 2 hours, question after question, where his consensus was, look, he's fine. He's done this exam. It's a very thorough exam, etc. He is now calling for Joe Biden to sit that same exam to prove that he is sound of mind. But I think we obviously compare the pair with Trump and Biden, especially now that we know they're going up against each other.
Yeah.
The reality is Biden's 81, Donald Trump is 77. If he wins this year, he will also be into his 80s if he did another term. Do you think that we can compare them based on age or cognitive abilities, or is it just this is just it?
Well, I think Trump, this again is unfair to some extent, but when you're looking at elections, people think about politics a lot less than us or the viewers here do. They look at it for a short amount of time. They see Biden, he looks old, he looks frail, he looks doddery on his feet, all the rest of it. That may be an unfair thing to think about, but it's true. Trump, only a few years younger, looks like he's got a lot more vitality to him, right? He looks more robust, he looks sturdier. So then people will just assume that goes into their mental health as well. And a couple of years ago, when Trump had this, I think his doctor came out and said that he had the most astonishingly excellent health of any man ever to be president.
Yeah.
Probably conveniently forgetting someone like Theodore Roosevelt. But so Trump got a load of criticism for that, and the Biden team says, hold my Bud Light, let's make it even more embarrassing.
But do you think that they're, I know you obviously said gaslighting, Maddie, but are they as we listed those 3 presidents before, and there's more examples of that, of doctors who haven't declared certain health issues from predators. Do you think that the Biden administration, the White House, Dr. Kevin O'Connor are actually lying?
Well, I think there's a difference between outright lying and saying that we're not going to disclose details about the cognitive abilities. They've been very light on the detail there. So I guess that amounts to a lie because it's a sin of omission. And it is what could be more important than the mental health of the most powerful person in the world. But I think it comes very soon after that damning report from the special counsel. Basically, it was a report into Joe Biden's mishandling of some classified documents. And the report basically concluded that he almost couldn't be held fully responsible for what happened because he was so cognitively impaired. And he was forgetting details about, heartbreaking things like forgetting details about his son, Beau, who tragically died of cancer a few years ago, and this sort of thing. And it's not pretty reading, and you feel almost like a bit grubby and tawdry kind of looking at it because it's sad, but equally it affects us all because it's the leader of the free world. So obviously we have a right to be interested and to know what's really going on.
Of course, and I think they're never going to do it. To wrap this segment up, they're never going to do it. They're never going to get Joe Biden to sit a cognitive exam for fear of what will happen. But I think it is important to the public when electing him again, if he were to be elected again, that he does sit the exam to prove that he's sound of mind, and then they can take it from there, whether they get Kamala Harris in charge or whether they elect... we're not even getting into that. Or another Democratic candidate, whatever it may be. But I think it is important that, for peace of mind for the American public. 2 billion people go to the polls this year. 140 million of those are going to vote in 2 weeks on the 15th of March. Unfortunately, they're in Russia. We already know who they are going to elect. That is, of course, their president, Vladimir Putin. He's now well into his 25th year as Russia's leader. Credible opposition leaders have been banned from standing, and Alexei Navalny, once the strongest opposition voice in Russia, has died in mysterious circumstances just weeks before the vote. So who's left to take on Putin? There's a communist candidate, Nikolai Kharitonov, at 75. He's the oldest Russian presidential candidate in history. He was the main election challenger in 2004, losing 13% to 71%. This time, he's polling at 6%. Vladislav Davinkov is widely seen as the most liberal candidate, but has still been sanctioned by the UK for his stance on Ukraine. He came 4th in the race to be Moscow's mayor last September, and now he's polling at 4%. And then there's Leonid Slutsky. He's been accused of sexual harassment and called to end Russia's official moratorium on the death penalty in place since 1996. He's stuck at 3%. Now, guys, is this the world's most pointless election?
I think so. I think you've got to be brave to want to stand in any of these elections, right? Aside from the fact that if you're a candidate with your surname is Slutsky and you're being accused of sexual harassment, that's a slightly awkward place in which to be. Yeah, well, I thought I'd get that.
I'm glad it was you, James.
Well, I'd get that out of the way nice and early.
I love nominative determinism.
Exactly right. But in university elections here in the UK and other places, you have an option of reopen nominations, or RON, when you don't like any of the candidates. Of course, if you want that here, you just reopen the windows instead, right? Yeah. So many people who are trying to oppose Putin get thrown out. Fall out of these windows. You'd be a brave person to want to stand in this kind of election.
I mean, I'm kind of just thinking, are these people put up by Putin? Surely, are they fake candidates just to, give the illusion that this is a democratic state?
I don't know about that, but I think that perhaps the ones that really have no chance, the ones who he's not afraid of, he would let run. I mean, we saw what has happened to Alexei Navalny in the last week and a half, I think. And there have been candidates like Boris Nadezhdin, who was this guy who basically came out of nowhere, who suddenly built up a big political following, and he was very anti-war, which was interesting because although Russians it's very hard to voice these opinions in public. There are just so many young Russian men have now been lost, so many families affected by this directly, that there is a great deal of anti-war sentiment, although it's not always easy to gauge how strong it is because there's such high penalties for expressing these opinions. So I wonder if these guys are the ones who, let's allow them to run so they have some kind of rubber stamp that an election has taken place. But when you've just murdered your most well-known opponent and other credible people have been barred from the election, what does it really amount to?
And it's not like they're anti the invasion, so there's nothing, crazily dissimilar to Putin. But on the point of Alexei Navalny, I do wonder what the state of Russia is like, how the constituents are feeling after he was blatantly, we'll just say, potentially, allegedly murdered in prison, in an Arctic prison.
And even if he wasn't, I think they found injuries on his body that do suggest suffocation or strangulation. But even if he had died in captivity, it would have still been essentially murder because he would have been in a Siberian penal colony with inadequate... This was a very healthy man when he went in there, and he's suddenly not healthy. I think you can say, maybe the lawyers disagree, but I think it amounts to murder, whatever happened to him.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think that the problem we've got is that Putin would be, if you were to go into Russia with the polling company and do a genuinely fair poll, maybe you make everyone take truth serum or whatever, so they're not afraid, they would genuinely still quite like him because the amount of propaganda that they've had fed for them for the last quarter of a century. So he is genuinely popular, which is a broader problem as well. That even if he does die off one day, hopefully that he doesn't sort of live on forever, then there is still a problem of having to help unbrainwash, de-brainwash vast swathes of the public. You can't expect Russia, sadly, to turn into a nice liberal democracy just overnight. I mean, I guess that's what we hoped would have happened with Yeltsin, and then Putin comes along just after that, right? The rot runs really deep. And for all the complaints we've got about democracy, you can see the problems in Russia, how poor everybody is, how brainwashed everybody is, how it's run by just a gang of gangsters and thugs, how unable they are to even course correct when things are very obviously going wrong there. So whilst it's funny to look at and laugh at some of these guys here, one day we've got to hope that someone actually does come in, but they've got a hell of a job ahead of them.
Yeah, and actually a lot of the Russian elite has kind of been whittled away because a lot of people fled Russia at the time of the war and settled abroad, and often, taking their money with them and settling in places. I mean, there's lots I'm sure London has plenty, but south of France also, places like Dubai. There's a lot of the elite have left, and the people who were critical have gone, perhaps leaving behind people who are more likely to be sympathetic. And of course, the penalties for expressing any kind of discontent are so high. It comes after, we talked about Navalny, but also Prigozhin in that accidental plane crash that happened. That there's
followed the accidental coup he did.
Yes, exactly. It's definitely that it's very clear that you would have to be, I think, either incredibly brave, like Navalny brave, or perhaps, quite frankly, a bit stupid at this time to do it.
But it does make you wonder who he's got in his pocket to take over if something were to happen. He's obviously incredibly cautious of what could happen if there were to be an assassination attempt. But who could take over? He'd have to have a string of die-hard, Putin followers to take over because I do think it's one of the, as you said, James, they are indoctrinated, they are brainwashed in Russia, but I do wonder what it would take to kind of reverse that if it was the end of Putin. what would happen?
Yeah.
You never know who would come out of the woodworks and say, okay, let's start over.
Right, exactly. And the problem is that this isn't even based on an ideology, right? So it's not even like you had the kind of one communist leader follows another. They sort of at least paid lip service to something, and there was a pipeline up to the Communist Party and things like that. But there is no ideology here beyond that kind of gangsterism that Putin has developed. So does someone just come and fill that vacuum and keep the whole sort of security apparatus just to keep the show on the road? There is nothing behind that. And the thing that then really worries me, we just talked about Biden's mental health. If someone like Putin, who has all that power, realizes that he's dying or he's losing his grip on power, that guy's got nuclear codes as well. And that echoes very, very poorly. If he starts saying things that he has in the past, what is the point in having a world that doesn't have Russia in it? I think we should be really, really scared of those
100%. One thing that I want to end this segment on, because I just thought this was such an interesting piece of detail of this election that's happening in a few weeks is, first of all, there are polling booths, which I was gobsmacked to find out. But they're putting polling booths in Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine. They're going to that length to show, A, we've occupied Ukraine, and B, we're running a normal democratic election, which I just thought was so bizarre. I mean, genuinely, Putin's team think that they are fully taking over Ukraine.
It just shows this is just theatre rather than actual
exactly,
right?
Yeah, and it's totalitarian in the purest sense. It's sort of like something from 1984. Like Oceania has always been at war with East Asia. It's like this has always been Russia. This has never not been Russia. And many people in Russia genuinely do believe that this was always part of their territory, and damn anyone who dare suggest otherwise.
That's all from us on Mad World this week. Thanks to Madeline and James, and thank you for watching. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.